Nat, what's happening, brother?
Great to be here. Excited to be here. You got a beautiful space set up here. This is awesome.
Shout out to Jose,
Yeah.
incredible producer, and Marty for letting us use the studio too.
Love it.
So when we were prepping for this, we didn't realize that you had done a triathlon a couple months ago.
Yeah,
How was that experience?
good. So I learned this with our first kid. I feel like dads need a like push project.
Mm-hmm.
It's like because you go through this like interesting psychological space when you have a kid coming of kind of like, oh my God, like I need to figure my shit out before this kid gets here. And so before our first daughter was born, I went like super crazy down the like crypto programming rabbit hole leading up to her being born. And then this time I was like, okay, I'm going to try to do like a half Ironman triathlon. So I had done the DC marathon last fall. And then coming off of that, I was like, all right, I've got about 6 months because she was born in May and the half Ironman was in April. This was October. I was like, all right, I have 6 months. I've never swam more than a lap and I've never biked distance. So I'm going to like go try to figure out how to do this. And I had a couple of friends who had done like full Ironmans who were super helpful. My coach I was just telling you about was really helpful. It was really fun. It's a great physical challenge. You've done full Ironmans before. Right?
We
Yeah,
both
You both have. Okay.
It was kind of the start of the show. We both came down here with the Waco Ironman, and we were both in transition, trying to figure out what we wanted to do next.
Nice.
But I'm curious, was that Galveston that you did?
Yeah.
Okay. How was that?
It was okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's you're swimming in like the Houston Bay, which like tastes a little oily. And then you're just biking on like the flat island, right? And I think it was like a 15, 20 mile an hour headwind for the second half of the bike ride, which was just like kind of demoralizing.
Yeah.
I think I want to do another one at some point, and I want to go try to do like a destination one, something really scenic. I feel like it would be
cool.
really fun.
Yeah, we both, our foray into triathlon, similar to you, we both individually did half Ironmans in 2019. But similar to you, I'd never swam for distance before. I hadn't ridden a bike in like 10 plus years, but just that feeling of being a beginner and just training for something and then putting that end date on the calendar 6 months, 8 months down the road and doing it is the best feeling.
Yeah. And it was fun training for it here because I went to the Deep Eddy pool all winter. Nobody else was going because it was 40, 50 degrees out, but the water was still warm enough.
Yeah.
And then you never had to wait for lanes or anything. It's really nice like water to swim in. And so just going there and swimming through the winter was like cold plunge plus good exercise. It was great.
Did you find that building momentum into the Ironman led you to what was next for you?
I mean, I'm sort of off physical training stuff right now just because, you know, it's like with a newborn, like you're not getting the best sleep. And so I don't want to like overtrain during it. So, and trying to like still balance work and all those other responsibilities. So I was like, all right, I can do this as the capstone project, take a couple months, take it a little bit easier, and then start to get back into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not sure what the next one will be. I want to do a full Ironman at some point. I just don't think I have the time to dedicate because it's like 10 to 20 hours a week of training, right? Like leading up to it. It's a lot of time.
It's an insane undertaking.
The race is almost like the reward, the cherry on top. The hard part is actually training, being like on Saturday, I'm going to ride my bike for 6 hours. And then on Sunday, I'm going to run 15 miles in the peak of training.
It's a lot.
Everything is dedicated to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, I think it's, you know, just phases of life, right? Like having 2 kids, like I can't really do that on the weekends.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, a great, like I'd rather hang out with my kids than run for 15 miles anyway. Dude, I feel like I'll pick it back up later in life when I have more of that time back.
Yeah, we'll all do a full at some point together.
Exactly.
Right, we'll make a promise on the show to do that.
So dude, my plan, I mean, you guys probably know this, it's like the 30s age bracket is like super competitive, right? Because everyone's trying to get really, really good before they like, you know, have kids and stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like 40s, I can really like thrive, right? I can get into that in 10, 15 years because everyone will have fallen off to like have their young kids. You know, mine will be in school and stuff and I can just like go crush that age bracket, right? Just pick it back up then.
Totally. And you're 30, right?
30, yeah.
It's funny because Harry and I, when we met you at Barton, we just assumed that you were older, not because you look old, but because it seems like you've just done so much stuff at a young age, whether it's like the SEO, the blogging, the writing. I know your first book's coming out in 2024. For you, did you just start getting into the SEO and blogging space at a really young age? Is that kind of how you got started?
Yeah, I'd been interested in entrepreneurship in high school. And then I went to college. I was in the business school originally, and the sort of prevailing wisdom there was like, oh, well, you go into entrepreneurship later. You go do like consulting or finance or something first, right? And so I went down that path a little bit and was at my second consulting internship, like sophomore summer or something, and sort of decided that this was not for me. This is not going to be a happy life. And so I literally sort of moved my computer into the corner of the room that I was working in, and I was just reading entrepreneurship books all day and banging out the work as quickly as possible. And so I started my first blog then, talking about habits and willpower and like positive behavior change, that kind of stuff, and started exploring SEO because of that. And so that was 2013. So that was what first got me into it, and then started my now main site like my senior year of college. And that was when I really started to like dial in some of the SEO stuff, because I think my senior spring I wrote an article on water fasting, which was like not a thing back then, right? This is 2015. People weren't really talking about fasting. Intermittent fasting was like barely a thing. And for a while I had the top spot on Google for water fasting results, and for a few terms like that. And that was a really magical moment, because I've been blogging for like a year on the site and not getting much traffic at all. And then I woke up one day and looked at the analytics, and there were just 200 visitors yesterday. I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Right. And then it kind of kept going up. And for a while, that page was getting 2,000 visitors a day, and wasn't having to do anything. And I was just thinking, okay, this is the best thing in the world. I'm going to go hard on this and really figure out SEO. And that worked out incredibly well as a first like entrepreneurial foray.
So did you kind of stumble into the SEO stuff? Like just as a skill set?
Yeah. I mean, because I'd been doing it on my site. I had a job with a company here in Austin for like 8 or 9 months, running like their blog and doing a bunch of content marketing there, and learning some SEO through that and kind of applying it to my site on the side. And then when that job ended, my site was also like taking off more and more. That was when I had like all of the Google search terms for like men's sex health stuff, which was super fun.
Didn't you have like a Kegel agency or something like you had like a course?
I have like the best selling, or one of the best selling. A couple people have come in and done a better job of it, which like, finally, like one of the best selling iPhone apps for Kegel exercises for men. Because they were like, I had these, so I was number one on Google for like last longer in bed, orgasm without ejaculating, like all of these terms, Kegel exercises for men, reverse Kegels, like all of those. And I could see that I was sending all this traffic to this other person's app who was charging $3 a download. I'm looking at it and I'm going, I'm sending a few hundred clicks a day to this app. If they're converting 10% of those, that's like good money.
Yes.
And so I found a developer. We made my own version that was, more targeted at men, regular Kegels and reverse Kegels, right? And released it. I think it cost $4,000 to make the app with him, which was a lot of money to me at the time. And then I think the first month it did like $1,200, and the second month it did like $6,000 or something. And it's basically made $1,500 to $4,000 a month every month since then. And it's been 7 years.
That's incredible.
It's like, it's one of the funniest parts of the month. Just like the random Kegel app check shows up in my bank account.
Wow. You're like the OG esoteric health guy.
Yeah. Water fasting, Kegels, semen retention. Were you talking semen retention?
Dude,
back
I
in
wasn't.
the day?
No, that came onto the scene later. And I like wasn't really writing about it anymore, so I didn't talk about it. But I've heard very good reviews.
We had Adrian Grenay on, and half of the podcast was just him talking about semen retention and how it changed his life. So
I love it.
That might be
I've heard that from a few people. That might have to give it a go at some point.
That with the Kegels would be an unstoppable combo.
Yeah. The problem is it's harder to make an app for that one. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, okay, don't jizz today. All right, cool. Like, why did I pay $3 for this?
Yeah. Well, you just make a NoFap counter on your phone and you just count the days.
There you go. It's not a bad idea.
Right?
Just reskin like a wedding countdown app or something.
Yeah. And semen retention app. I'm curious though with the blogging. I feel like a lot of people get into blogging because they have this passion for writing, and they view that's kind of their forum to develop their writing craft. for you, was it more so like, hey, I see this as a potential business, and then you kind of developed your passion for writing along the way and realized that you're really good at it? I'm just kind of curious.
So I was kind of not bad at writing, at least. And I knew that I wanted to do something like entrepreneurial-y post-grad, but didn't think I could really start a business yet. And so it's kind of like, okay, if I'm a decent writer and I want to start a business, like what's a marketing thing that could be related to that? So content marketing felt like the best place to start for building a marketing skill set.
Right.
And so I was kind of in this position senior year of college in the fall where I was like, okay, I don't have a job right now. Like I don't have a business that's making money, but when I graduate, I don't want to have to like go do a job I don't want to do. So I'll try to figure out this content marketing thing, try to get like a freelance writing gig or something with it. And then I'll at least have that. And I had a whiteboard in my room in college and I wrote $2,000 a month on it. And I was like, by the time I graduate, I just have to figure out how to make $2,000 a month because then I can move to Argentina. I can live off of that. And like, I'll figure everything else out from there. And so I started my blog, I put some articles on there, and then I started reaching out to companies to try to get a freelance writing gig. And the first two I reached out to were Buffer, the like social media scheduling tool, and Zapier, the like automation platform. And Zapier was like way smaller back then. I mean, now they're huge, right? But I reached out to both of them and Zapier said yes. They were like, yeah, we'll, take some articles from you. I was like, great. Did a couple articles and then they posted a listing for a like college intern. And I didn't tell them that I was in college. I was like, oh yes, like content marketing, like, my articles were good. So I didn't have to like, I wasn't pumping myself up, but I was just like, we just won't mention that I'm a college student. But then they posted that internship and I was like, hey, actually, like, can I apply for this? Can I do it? And he said, yeah, totally. And so I got to fly out to California during part of my winter break, hung out with like the co-founders, the head of marketing at the time, like just got to do this week-long intensive. And they were the best at content marketing back then. They had like all of the search terms related to marketing automation and improving marketing. Like they were just totally dominant. So they were really cool to learn from in that sense. Then got to work with them through the spring and like it just kind of compounded from there.
What was Zapier doing differently? Like what made them so much better than everyone else?
That's a good question. I mean, the biggest thing was that their articles were like SEO optimized and everything, but then they were also just really good, right? Like I think a lot of people focus super heavily on the marketing optimization, right? Like in the SEO optimization, like, okay, we got to get in all the secondary keywords and we got to like, get all these backlinks and whatever. But then at the end of it, they don't have a good article, right? And if you have like a really good article and you do 80% of that stuff, you're going to do so much better. I mean, even if you do 50% of that stuff with a great article, it just seems to do better than if you like 100% perfect it, but then have very like mediocre writing. And so they were really kind of like writers first and then like optimizers second. And I kind of took that to heart. I remember my first article I did with them, I sent it to their head of marketing. I guess he's technically head of like content marketing. His name's Danny Schreiber. He's an awesome guy. I think he's still there actually. Incredible dude. And I sent it to him and he messages me on Slack and he says, okay, I'm going to send you some feedback. I want you to know that this is in the interest of helping you be the best you can possibly be at marketing, at content marketing, and at writing. I was like, okay. It's like, it's kind of a scary way to lead into getting feedback. And then he sends it back to me and it's all redlined, right? Like he must have spent hours going through and just marking every single thing up. Like you can make this sentence stronger this way, move around these paragraphs. You can go deeper here. Like he just went in and that really set the standard. It was like, oh, you guys take this very seriously. And so that made me want to take it seriously. And I kind of carried that forward with a lot of the content marketing stuff I did after that and with my own site where I was like, if I'm going to write an article about this topic and I want that article to be like the #1 result on Google for that topic, it needs to be worthy of being, it needs to be the best article on that topic. And that strategy worked really well, right? And I think that's how I ended up with all these like weird search terms, bringing people to my site.
In your peak, how many articles were you writing a day?
I mean, me personally writing, probably never more than 3 per week.
Okay.
Right. But then I eventually started a SEO marketing agency, Growth Machine. And I mean, and it was basically like, okay, I figured out how to do this, and now we're going to figure out how to do that at scale, with writers who we can hire and train, and we can like build systems around this. And I mean, I think at times it was like 100 articles a week.
Wow.
Something crazy. So
one of the moments in your story that I'm curious to learn more about is when you were leaving college, because I feel like so many kids today realize that they don't want to go down the corporate rabbit hole, but they're afraid to make the decision, so they just do it anyways. And once your foot is through that door, you can stay there for a long time. Like you can just end up working in a job that you don't really love.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious, what was your framework of thinking? I know you said like that you just realized through that first internship that you just didn't want to be there, but there's still a lot of pressure to go down that rabbit hole, even if you have, there are high paying jobs that I'm sure would have like loved to paid you to go work on Wall Street or work in a consulting gig. So what was your framework like back then to make that choice to be like, hey, I'm just going to like do something entrepreneurial?
It's a good question. I mean, I feel like I was always just kind of stubborn in the sense of like, I knew I wanted to do things my way, and I didn't trust people who said that like you had to do it this other way. I was like, I feel like I can figure it out, right? Like, and it might have just been cockiness or whatever, right? Where I was like, well, I think I'm smarter than you, so like I'm gonna go figure this out. Actually, I mean, I think it was a couple of things. One, everybody has this experience of like seeing somebody out there doing something and saying like, oh, well, if they can do it, like I can probably figure this out too, right? Like finding a very approachable example, right? So not taking like not looking at like a Jeff Bezos or somebody and being like, oh, maybe I can be like that someday, but finding somebody who's like 26 and making money online, like doing things independently and being like, oh, I can probably get at least to that point. I can't remember. I know I had examples back then. I just can't remember who they were. I mean, 4-Hour Workweek was like the book that convinced me, as I feel like it was for so many people. Where it's like I found that and I said, okay, there were two parts of it. One was that I actually need way less money than I thought, right? Especially because that was the year that Nomad List came out. So that like wasn't a big thing before then, but the digital nomad was just starting to take off. Like internet was just starting to get good enough in these like developing countries where you could go do that. And so looking at that and saying, oh, I could live in, Chiang Mai for $700 a month probably and have a pretty good life, right? Like, okay, if I can charge $150 per article, that's only 6 articles. No, it's less than that, 5 articles. And then I'm like, my life is paid for. I can do 1 a week, right? I feel like it was just doing that math and realizing it was so much more possible than I thought. And realizing that I didn't have to build like Instagram, right? I feel like in college, especially, I feel like this has probably changed now, but back then it was sort of like you're either, trying to make Instagram or Facebook or something like this, or you're going to corporate.
Right.
That middle wasn't as established back then. I feel like there's so many more examples of it now, and it's such the middle back then was like, oh, you like open a restaurant. Yeah. Right. The digital business middle, I feel like wasn't as obvious, but finding a few examples really helped. And I mean, now there's like so many people doing it, right? Like I feel like an old man. I'm not, but it's just being like, it's so easy for kids these days. Like, this is all the tools that you have now to go after it. Like if you can just find somebody who's a few years ahead of you who's doing it and be like, okay, I'm just gonna like copy them for a while, and then I'll figure out my own version of it eventually. There's this good article. It's like Helsinki bus station theory or something. Maybe people have mentioned it before, but I really like it, where it's basically like when you're trying to figure out how to do something like for yourself and that feels authentic and that feels you. And this could be, they use it's about being a photographer, but it applies to like business stuff too, right? It's like in the beginning, you basically have to copy people. Yeah. Right. Like find somebody whose style you like, just emulate it and run with that for a while. And then as you emulate, that as you sort of like ride the bus through downtown where everybody is, you will eventually start to like find a route that leads you to somewhere like more interesting that maybe nobody else has been yet. But you have to be willing, or you have to just like start with, okay, we're going to take a bunch of stuff that obviously works, right? And like kind of follow that route for a while. And then we'll like slowly get somewhere interesting over time. And yeah, I don't know, it worked out.
Well, it's funny you say that because your newsletter, which is fantastic, by the way, there's a specific article where you literally lay out a playbook for someone that wants to build a business in the creator economy or start a brand from like 0 to 10,000.
Oh yeah.
And you give people the exact playbook. But one of the things you said is you actually discourage people from trying to become really great. You were basically like, you just need to be, I think you almost said like good enough or really good or something like that, which almost speaks to the fact that there's like this digital middle ground now in the creator economy where as long as you're good enough, you can still make you can create a great lifestyle business on your terms too.
Yeah.
So it'd be cool to unpack some of that as well. Or like, what should, the off the couch person be thinking of? Okay, I have 0 subscribers, 0 followers, but I want to build something.
Yeah. I kind of feel like we touched on this a little bit with like the Iron Man stuff too, where in some sense, like making any progress is often better than like thinking you have to go like all or nothing. Right. And I was talking about this with another friend recently with like fitness stuff too, where they were basically saying they'd been going to the gym for a year and they hadn't really gotten the results they wanted, right? But they were sort of happy they'd been going. And I was like, that's kind of a win, right?
Definitely.
Like if your first year of taking fitness seriously, you just show up at the gym 3 days a week, right? Like that's a win, right? You just showed up, right? And I feel like for audience building type stuff, it's the same thing, right? Like for me, when I first started that first blog, I said, okay, I'm just going to do 3 articles a week and I'm just going to try to make them like a little bit better each time. Just try to like, slowly iterate around what's working, but set that 3 per week schedule and like, do not let myself deviate from it. And there is this just like factor of if you can like do something for long enough and really stick with it, stuff tends to trend towards working out, assuming you're actually like trying to get better along the way, right? Like you definitely do see people who try to like build an audience for 5, 6, 7 years and it just never goes anywhere, right? And I feel like everybody's afraid of being that person.
Yes.
Right? Like, and that is scary, right?
Yeah.
Because there is a little bit of like, wow, did I just spend like 5 years and got nowhere with it?
Yeah.
And so that's where the like just be consistent advice isn't quite good enough, right? I think you have to like be consistent and kind of be constantly iterating on it, constantly trying to like improve it a little bit. I remember like, and this is a real throwback, I haven't thought about this in a while. Like at Zapier, I think they had like an 80-20 content experimentation policy, right? Where it was like 80% of the time we're going to do formats and styles that we know work. It's going to rank. It's going to convert, right? Like we've tested this, we know it's going to happen. And then 20% of the time we'll just like screw around and try new stuff, right? Like because we need to figure out the next thing, right? And because you can kind of like get stuck in both camps. You can get stuck in the, I'm going to try this, but I'm not going to experiment with it very much. And then you end up getting nowhere over a long period of time. You can also get stuck in the, I'm going to do this. Okay, this worked. I'm going to hammer the shit out of this and not try anything else. And then it works great for a while, but you don't know what's coming after that. And so eventually that like technique stops working and you're not ready for the next thing, right? You kind of have to like be willing to find that balance. But if you can do that, if you can just build that habit of consistency and then slowly keep tweaking it over time and like refine on what's working and what's not, you get to really interesting places, I think, over the long term, right? Like, and you kind of have to be like willing to give up some of those old beliefs too. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, right? Where I kind of feel like people don't go to websites anymore. That used to be the main thing that you did on the internet was you went to different sites and read stuff and looked at stuff. And now we use apps. And I resisted for a very long time taking my like blog and newsletter off of my site and putting it on Substack because there was always this like, oh, you have to have your own site. Like you've got to own, your own domain. Everything has to be there, blah, blah, blah. But then I was like, people don't really like read articles on sites anymore. They're like reading them in apps. And so whichever one has the best distribution is probably going to be the one that I should be on. And so making that transition. And now it really feels like, okay, if you're doing kind of like a business newsletter, then maybe you want to be on Beehive. If you're doing like a Think Boy newsletter, then maybe you want to be on Substack. But like just leaving everything in your own silo is probably like holding you back now, unless you're going for like super SEO strategy. I mean, it's just like it all changes really fast. You got to be like willing to do that experimentation, figure it out.
Do you have any useful advice for people who are getting started but are running into imposter syndrome? You mentioned just like copying other people, but is there anything else that you've used over time just to get through some of these hurdles that people run into when they start putting stuff out there?
That's a good question. It's really funny you ask that because I've been dealing with a lot more imposter syndrome recently.
Interesting.
It's this weird thing where I feel like for some reason and this is just classic Dunning-Kruger, right, curve, right? Where as you get better, you think you know less and less. And there's part of me that looks at the articles I wrote 6, 7, 8 years ago. It's like, man, I wish I had that confidence again. Right? Like, I wish I thought I knew as much now as I thought I knew back then. Right? I mean, just having that confidence can work, right? I feel like the buzz term now is embrace the cringe, right? Like people maybe try too hard to not be cringy, but in some ways, like trying hard is kind of cringy, right? Or it will at least be cringy to a certain subset of people, and you have to be willing to like be okay with that. I don't love that advice. I have a draft of this. Maybe I'll get it out in time, but I feel like shake the cringe's hand, right? Like don't go full hug, right? Maybe don't go all the way of being like super annoying copy and paste, like social media influencer, like doing all of it, but be willing to do stuff that makes you like a little bit uncomfortable, which isn't helpful just to say like, oh, like just do it. But
do you have any examples from what you've been putting out recently?
Oh yeah. I mean, okay. So my whole thing the last 6 months is, I've been growing my TikTok and Instagram, talking about books and stuff. And when I started doing it, so the thing that works very well for me is hiding the cover of the book when the video starts. And we were talking about it's incredible engagement tactic, because you open the video and you see the pages of a book, but you have no idea what book it is. And there's immediately that like, what book is that? I want to know.
Dude, I spent like 20 minutes on your page.
And there's part of me that's like, man, that is really fucking annoying, right? Like, and I know that I am doing it to get views. But the thing is, if I don't do that, the video doesn't do well. Like I've tried, right? I've tried it where I show the title from the start, and I've tried it where I hide it from the start. And if you show it from the start, people are like, okay, cool, title, go. And then, they don't get like the full review or recommendation of the book. And so for me, it's like, okay, I'm willing to be slightly annoying to like help get that out more. And I won't be completely annoying because I'll put the title of the book in the caption for people who want to be impatient, right? So it's like, and there's, in sort of like any kind of marketing or any type of thing you're growing, you're going to have to like probably do something that, I don't want to say like, not that you should do something that makes you feel uncomfortable, but something where it's like, that tactic is like a little annoying, right? Or like it's a little like too marketing-y for me. But a lot of people go broke by refusing to market themselves.
Definitely.
Right? Like, and if you're going to err on one side, err on the side of overdoing it, I think, and then you can pull back what feels inauthentic, because you don't want to like err on the side of, oh, well, I refuse to do any marketing-y stuff because I'm, an artist, and, my work is pure, and I'm not going to sell it because it shouldn't need to, right? And it's like, you kind of need to, right? Like you're going to have to do some of that to stand out today.
Yeah. You actually just made me have a realization thinking back to like, the year and a half that we've been doing the Meat Mafia, because before we launched, you were mentioning like Nick Huber and Sahil Bloom and all these guys in early COVID that really started popularizing Twitter threads and crushing it doing that. And here Harry and I we're like, we really want to start putting out our content in nutrition. We think we can grow a brand around this. Well, threads make sense. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, is this like cringe writing threads about all these different nutrition topics? But lo and behold, you commit to 2 to 3 good threads a week, kind of replicate their style, how they write hooks and headers. And then next thing you know, you have a following, and then you have a podcast, and you have a whole brand that you're able to monetize. But it's like, you have to, like you said, you almost have to lean into that cringe a little bit, but you realize like the overall purpose of why we're doing this is we're trying to make people healthier. And the only way we're going to do that is if we actually grow our following and replicate what other people are doing that's actually working.
Totally. And I think Brandon Sanderson, he's a fantasy author, like one of the best-selling authors in the world right now. He did a Kickstarter last year that raised $42 million. Wow.
Are you serious?
Biggest Kickstarter ever.
Wow. 42 million.
42 million for 4 books. And he's self-publishing them direct to the Kickstarter supporters and then publishing them on Amazon and everywhere. And he said something really interesting about this, where he was like, basically the book that he wanted to write originally was this insane fantasy epic. He eventually did write it. It's called The Way of Kings, and it's considered to be like, one, an incredible fantasy book, and also just incredibly hard to get into because it's so complex and so intricate, and it has like dozens of magic systems and all this stuff. And what he said was he could never get that book published originally because nobody knew who he was. So publishers wouldn't even look at it. They're like, this thing is 1,400 pages long, right? Like, what are you doing? And so he had to write like simpler, more like introductory fantasy books first that were more marketable, easier. And then once he'd established a name for himself, then he could do the crazy epic thing that he wanted to do. And he was like, once I accepted that, it was, my career basically took off. And I feel like that's really good advice, right? Especially because if you're, I'm sure for you guys, right? Like so much about health and nutrition and stuff. And so somebody comes to you and they say, hey, I want to start taking my health seriously. What should I do first? Right? You're not going to be like, okay, well, you got to throw out all of your cleaning products, right? Like you got to buy everything from the farmer's market and the butcher, right? You got to you just be like, I don't know, like, do you have a water filter? Right? Like, let's just start super simple, right? And it's like, yes, it's not the complete solution, but you kind of have to start, like, meet people where they are and then bring them into your world over time. And it's kind of what some of the like uncomfortable, like doing Twitter threads does, right? Is it's like, it wins the Twitter algorithm for you. It gets you on people's radar. And then once they're following you and you're on their radar, then you can like get more intricate or do the stuff that, is more thoughtful through the newsletter and through this podcast and places like that.
Yeah. So you started your podcast in 2017?
Yeah. I mean, so the Made You Think podcast, like it basically started because me and my friend were trying to read more. We wanted like an accountability, like book club. And so I think we started it in 2017 and we were doing it really religiously for a year and a half. And then life got in the way and it kind of like fell off for 2 years. And then it came back for like 3 or 6 months. And then it fell off for another year or two. And now it's been back in earnest over the last year. So yes, started in 2017, but saying we've been doing it for 6 years would not be honest.
Do you have a favorite medium for distributing your content? Like we love the podcast. Like it's such a fun way to have these types of conversations, dig in deeper, get to know somebody, but also like the written stuff's so much fun too. Like there's something about Twitter that is addicting to like put really good content out there and have people engaging with it. So I'm just curious, like, do you have a favorite type of content that you create?
I mean, I'm definitely a writer first at the end of the day, right? Like if I could just write all the time, that's what I would like to do. And there's a little bit of the, again, the like, well, I should just like focus purely on writing books and not do any of this other nonsense because I'm a writer and it's like, that's stupid, right? Like if you're Stephen King, you can do that. Until then, right, you got to do the other stuff too, I think at least, or it's at least, it'd be silly not to if you have the skill set for it. So the thing that makes me happiest if somebody says they liked it is when they say they liked something I wrote. But the podcast is probably the podcast feels the least like work aside from writing, because it's like me and two of my best friends just hanging out talking about books we're reading, right?
It's just pure fun.
It's great. I love it.
Yeah.
But it gets less reach than other things. So it's like in terms of the satisfaction of seeing growth and numbers and whatever come from it, that one's been the slowest for me. But it's also the one that I put the least like serious business marketing-y focus on, right? And so the TikTok and Instagram stuff has been really fun because that was something that didn't exist for me 6 months ago. And now it's like 1 million+ people a month seeing that. Like, that's awesome. So that feels really cool, especially like I've gotten to the point where I kind of know which videos are going to do well and which ones are more experimental. So being able to say, this video is going to do well, post it, and then a few days later, it's got a couple 100,000 views. It's like, oh yeah, okay, I'm good at this.
It's also interesting how you view yourself as a writer first, but because your YouTube and TikTok has exploded so much over the last few months, people know you as like the book guy, teaching people how to read better. That's got to be interesting to think about.
It is kind of funny. I mean, in some ways, it's a little sad just because it speaks to how much less reading people do than anything else, right? I mean, a successful book would sell 50 to 100,000 copies in nonfiction, right? Like that's good. Or you think about the Atomic Habits and whatever that have sold 10 million copies, but it's a success to the publisher is like 50 to 100,000.
Wow.
That's not many people.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I have an article do well, it'll get read by like at least 50,000 people, right? And it's like, and that's tiny, but a 50,000 views on an Instagram reel for me, that's like a bad performance, right? So it's like, okay, it's bad over here. It's like kind of good and normal here. And it's like out of the park success over here. But like that area where it's the out of the park success and hits the fewest number of people is like also the one that I care about most. Right. And so it is this thing of like, if you're trying to spread ideas, books and writing are kind of like the worst way to do it. They're the most durable.
Yeah.
Right. I do think that's really important. A good book could last 20, 50, 100, 2,000 years. I don't think that anybody's going to be watching my reels in like 5 years, probably.
Right.
So there is that element to it. But yeah, the scale thing is, it's weird to think about sometimes.
What's your reading style? Are you a cover to cover guy? Are you like Naval, where you just pick things that interest you and then kind of go back to different books? How do you personally read?
I'm pretty cover to cover if I stick with it. I'm not shy about like quitting books. If it's not interesting or not good, I'll put it down. But once I start, I'm pretty much cover to cover. And I just feel like to me, it's kind of a meditative practice, right? Like I want to make myself sit down and focus because so much of the rest of my time is like very unfocused.
Right.
That, okay, if I'm reading and writing, I'm actually going to like diligently go through this. And I'm a very like active reader in terms of like marking things up as I'm going. Which, I mean, if you're not like a writer or a podcaster or something, you probably don't need to be as diligent about it. But for me, it's very fun. The other thing I've started doing, which I would actually recommend to anyone, because this has been an incredible practice and like change in my reading life, is I've started using my books as like mini journals. So, and I always read physical books. I think like, if you're traveling or if you're moving apartments, it doesn't really make sense. But once you're have like a more established house setting, whatever, physical books are just so nice to have around.
So nice.
It's such a wonderful, like, being able to see them and be reminded of the ideas. And especially if you're like putting sticky tabs in them and stuff, being able to pull that out and see, those things that spoke to you in the past. Like, yes, they're inconvenient, expensive, whatever, but it's just like a beautiful artifact to have in your home.
Definitely.
And so I've started writing little journals whenever I start a new book. Like, okay, here's the date that I'm starting it. Here's some things that are going on in my life, right? And those are really fun to look back on now. So I've been doing it for a bit over a year, and so I can pull some books off the shelf, and it's like, oh yeah, this is what was going on when I read this. And I feel like it'll be especially cool for my kids if they care. Right, in 20 years, like, oh, like Dad was on the Meat Mafia podcast when he started this book.
That's what I was gonna say. It's probably gonna be so cool for your kids, like just as a reference.
Yeah.
And they'll just be able to see like, where you're at in life, what you were thinking about.
Totally.
Is there a book that you can think of that has had a particular influence on just what you're doing or just on your life in general?
One that actually comes to mind right now that I've referenced a lot recently is Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield.
It's like our favorite book.
Yeah.
So good.
Just so simple and to the point. It just like, it kind of just hits you where you need to be hit.
Yeah.
It's like, God damn.
I think especially if you do anything kind of creative he talks a lot in that book about shadow careers, right? And how if you're afraid to go after your true calling, you will pick something that is a shadow of that calling and go after that instead, right? Because the stakes are lower. You won't feel as bad if you fail. Maybe you'll feel like you can make more money there, whatnot, but you're so afraid of failing at the big thing that you go after a smaller thing instead. And you just don't want to lose your life in a shadow career. And I don't know, I reread it like a year ago and it just really hit me. I was like, oh, okay, this is totally what I'm doing. Like, this is exactly what I've been orienting my life around. And it was just very helpful for being like, okay, going back to the writing thing, right? Like most authors don't make much money. It's not a great career choice financially. It can be super lucrative if you're in that top like 0.1%, but it doesn't go that well for most people in it. And in some ways it's like harder having had entrepreneurial experience and things, because it's like, I know I can make money doing other stuff. If I didn't know that, it would be a little bit easier to be like, okay, I'm going all in on writing and like just doing that. But knowing that and then being like, no, I'm going to try to do this riskier thing where even the high end of the upside is not, even the ceiling on the upside is not nearly as high as it is in so many other careers. And it's still so likely that you even like do moderately well, is like scary. but it is the thing that I like want to go after most. I feel like it was funny because I read that book, and like our first daughter was born like around the same time, about a year and a half ago. And I don't remember if this was in the book or if I just thought it while reading it. It was one of the two, but it was sort of like, what decisions can you make today that your kids would be like proud of you for in 20 years? Or what advice would you give to your kids in the same situation? Right. And it's like, okay, if my kid like loved writing and like had, some bit of skill in it and had the opportunity to go after it, but they said no to that to go after something that was just, purely financially driven, I would be like disappointed in them.
Yeah.
Right. I wouldn't tell them to do that. I was like, no, like just go for it. Right. I was like, okay, well, that's probably what I should do too.
Yeah. I don't know if there's another book that's so short, but has so much impactful information. And there's something about Pressfield. He's just such an honest guy, the way that he writes it, like just talking about all of his failures, like working the trucking jobs, in that part in the book where he talks about like the summer that he actually turned pro, where he just, I forget, I think he went out to the woods in California and was like, I'm literally going to kill myself or write this script, basically. And he quit
was like in a cabin eating liver, I think.
Yeah, he was eating liver. And cooking eggs. And then just like, he took a whole summer and then just finally had a shitty copy of a manuscript that didn't sell. He went back to New York, took another job, went back to California. He did that like 4 or 5 times before something finally got picked up. But just his process is just so reaffirming. For me, that's my most gifted book ever. And this last year, this was like the year where I pulled the ripcord of my corporate job so we could do this full time. So I actually would reread the book like every 3 months, just because it reaffirms so many of those principles of who I wanted to be and the characteristics that I wanted to have.
I love that.
Yeah. I've made some of the biggest decisions of my life around the reference of, would I give my brother this advice? Like, or like, what advice would I give my younger brother? Because when you're the guy in the situation, you're always going to tend to play it a little bit more safe, or maybe not see the full picture. But when you're giving other people advice, it's so much easier to just be like, just freaking do it, dude. Like,
it's such a weird quirk of human nature.
It's so unfortunate.
It's so much easier to give other people advice than ourselves.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. We probably just have more like biases and heuristics wrapped up in our own decision making, right? Like a little more sunk cost fallacy or something, right? Or I don't know. Maybe we optimize for opportunity for others and like optimize for like minimizing downside for ourselves, right? Like we're more optimistic with other people, more pessimistic with ourselves. I don't know. It's a good question to be like an interesting thing for someone to explore, right?
How has the overall process been for you writing your first book, from blogging, newsletter, Twitter, Instagram? It's like you've been on all these social platforms, had a ton of success. What has the foray been like into like long form writing and, getting a book deal?
Yeah. In terms of the actual long form writing, I mean, it's so different that there's part of me that is like, I wish I had started thinking about this seriously earlier, because in some ways, all of the article writing has been like bad practice, because it's been this whole experience of like, okay, I have to draw some of this stuff out and like really go deeper on it and be able to like hold a thread in my head across 100,000 words, right? It's really challenging, right? It's like editing an article for my blog. I can do that in an hour or two. I can hold it all in my head at one time, but I'm going through edits on the 3rd draft of the book right now. And it took the whole week to just read through it and mark it up, right? Like it's long, right? And by the time you get to the end, you start thinking, okay, did I like already talk about this, or how do I reorder these things? And so figuring out stuff like, even just how do you structure this thing, right? Like, how do I lay all this out? How do I like, keep, and there's a strong narrative element to it too. So I've had to learn a lot about like character development and dialogue and like that side of storytelling, not just pure nonfiction explanation stuff. And so like learning all of that has been really fun. And it's like, oh, maybe I want to do more of this afterwards. It's been a really great process, and it's very like emotionally taxing to work on something so big in the dark for almost a year now. Actually, yeah, it's almost exactly a year since I like started hacking away on it. I mean, that's really weird if you're like an internet creator person, or like the longest time I've ever gone from starting to work on something to having it be out in the wild is probably 2 to 3 weeks, right? And now this is over a year. And the crazy thing too is like all of my, right? I mean, not all of my, but all of my like writing related income for the next 2 to 3 years is tied up in the success of this asset, which I can get basically no preliminary feedback on. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I've been putting out 1 or 2 like TikToks and reels a day. And so I know, okay, this does well, this doesn't do well, or like I can tweak it like this, and I keep making it better and better and better, and basically like be very confident something's gonna do well. A great writer does maybe like 20 books in their life.
Yeah.
And so it's just the time to feedback is so much slower. It's just so many psychological changes. And it really fucked with me for the first 3 or 4 months. I didn't realize how badly it was messing with me. And because it was just like, I was so not used to nobody seeing the stuff I was writing, right? I was basically like hooked on the dopamine of I write something, I hit publish, tens of thousands of people see it. They tell me I'm smart. Like, let's fucking go. Right?
That short feedback loop is amazing though.
So nice.
It's tough to detach from.
Yeah. And it's just been really, that has been like the main psychological adjustment is like, oh, I have to be okay working on this like somewhat in the dark. And honestly, like sometimes I'll just, show a chapter to someone like often my wife, or I've sent some stuff to my editor. And half of it is like, I just want them to tell me that I'm not an idiot.
Right.
Because you look at anything for long enough, right? Everybody's done this, right? You say like squirrel, 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 squirrel. It's like, that's not a word, right? You say it enough and you're like, that doesn't make sense. You read your stuff over and over again. You're like, this is all shit. This is terrible. I just shouldn't like do this. I should go, do something else. So that part's been challenging.
Have you noticed any habit changes outside of writing, maybe particular to your health? Like, are you doing certain things in your life now to kind of like really just stay focused and locked in on the book?
Yeah. I mean, the endurance cardio is great, I think, for that, because and I actually think endurance cardio is great for life in general. This is like a huge topic switch, but when my wife, she did both births naturally. And, she said too, that like endurance cardio is like one of the best training things, because it like teaches you that in all of these like moments of like pain and suffering and struggle and whatever, if you just kind of like keep going, then that like cramp or that like hip pain or whatever just kind of like goes away eventually, and you can just keep moving, right? And I feel it's so true with the book work too, where there'll be days where I'm just like, okay, this is terrible, I don't want to do this. But if I had like a 2,000 words a day minimum when I was writing, 4,000 words a day minimum editing, and just like keeping that and keeping hammering on it, like eventually it will get to a good point. And I feel like the running and the biking and stuff was a very helpful balance doing them at the same time, because one, it's like, okay, this can make me feel good about myself because I like did a hard thing. And even if I'm not getting the like dopamine hit of publishing stuff, like I'm getting some accomplishment out of this physical stuff. And it's like training those grooves in your brain that if you just like keep moving, like it's going to get better eventually. So that's been really powerful. I also recently discovered that I have just like a pretty fucking bad gluten sensitivity.
Interesting.
So that's been a whole journey too. And I feel so much better now. And so like reorienting like diet and sleep and stuff around not going crazy working on this thing has been kind of a priority too.
Do you like a little morning cardio before you hit and write? My ideal schedule is get up at 6, get the workout done, then shower and stuff, and then get the girls up and like do hang out with them until like 9, and then go to work from like 9 to 5. Doesn't really work right now because like newborns don't care about your schedule. But that's sort of the ideal one that I started orienting around a few months ago, and that was really helpful because it's just like getting the hard workout done first. I really love the morning writing sessions too. That's really, really nice. But like I find I'll always get the writing done, but I won't always get the workout done. And so I kind of have to like get the workout done first, even though it isn't the top priority. I feel like there's always that advice like, oh, do your top priority first thing when you wake up. It's not necessarily good advice, right? Because like maybe you should like do the fitness stuff first, because that's like what's also a priority that you're most likely to fall through on. Right? Like maybe do that one first.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things that you wrote was your 40 tips. I'm going to butcher the title, but 40 tips for people under 30.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And you spent a little bit of time talking about like topics that related to like the importance of time. And then one of them was like, get healthy. It was literally like one line, just like get healthy. And I think a lot of people resonate with that because there's so much alpha in just being a healthier person.
Yeah.
Is there anything in particular that made you include that for your, like, relating to your own story?
Yeah. I mean, I was like a very unhealthy kid.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I grew up eating sort of like the standard American beige diet, right? And like, we didn't know back then, or like my parents didn't have all the information that we have today. Like, this is just what we ate growing up. And I didn't do any sports, right? So I wasn't very physically active. And then just in like high school, I kind of said, okay, I actually want to figure out how to get like strong. At least like I want to put on some muscle, right? And I was doing the typical like first time bulking, like figuring out I was like drinking a gallon of milk a day and going crazy. But it was fun and it worked. And it kind of gave me this little bit of unlock. I think a lot of people walk around thinking that a lot of stuff in their life is just like stuck in a certain way, where it's like, oh, I'm just an unhealthy person, right? Like, or oh, I'm not a runner, right? Or oh, like, I can't do that, right? And in so many cases, like you actually can, right? You just maybe don't have the information or whatever you need. And that experience of like, oh, I can read a book on weightlifting, I can go do it and eat a bunch, and now I am stronger and look better, was just like wild to me. I mean, I'm sure it sounds ridiculous to a lot of people. Actually, probably not. I think most people have had this experience at some point where they're like, wait, I actually have control over my body and my life. And if I change some of these things, then I feel better, right? Like my experience is better. And the weirdest part about it is that like you don't necessarily feel bad beforehand, right? And you could be just like walking through life at 40% of your capacity, feel completely fine, and have no idea that you're that way, right? And you don't realize it until you experience one of those like heightened states and then go, wait, I don't want to go back to that. Like that was terrible. And I had no idea, right? And that's such a weird thing, right? Like this is kind of a funny example, but do you guys scuba dive?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so when I was learning scuba, I took like a bonus course on like deep diving. So they took us down to 120 feet, and they gave you a cognitive test. So we did the test once up on the land, where it was like, how quickly can you count from like 1 to 25 on a scrambled board, and then they take you down to depth, and then they have you do it again, and it's literally twice as slow.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So your brain is operating at half speed, and I felt exactly the same, right? And I've kind of just always remembered that because it's like, oh yeah, I could be at 50% and still feel totally normal. And so the thing with health stuff is I feel like people see, oh, clean up your diet, right? Like get better water, right? Like hop in the cold plunge, do the sauna or whatever. And they're like, yeah, I feel okay, right? Like I don't really need to do that. It's like, just try it. Right. Just see what happens. And I've kind of just always carried that. Like maybe there's probably some even higher state of being that I can like exist in if I go play around with it. And the whole like get healthy generic advice is like, find something small to try and realize that you do actually feel better. And then that one little thing, I think for a lot of people becomes the motivation for them to go seek out, anything else that could, make them feel better and better.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about that old version of yourself, and it's like you think you feel good, but it's really like your baseline is so low, but you don't have the reference point of that higher baseline. So you're like, all right, well, I just feel good enough.
Yeah.
And I think people just mistake health and fitness for like, oh, it's like this vain thing of you just want to get jacked or have muscles or look aesthetic. And it's like, no, to your point, it's the person that you become in that process. And you can literally change your genetics and have incredible confidence and energy to go launch a new business. And it's changing your entire life. It's not just about the way that you look. It's the person you become.
Totally.
Is there anything that you've learned along the way in your health journey, whether it's like food quality, sauna cold plunge, just little hacks or just things to be mindful of for people as they go deeper and deeper into it?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely, I'm not completely obsessive, but I am pretty, it's funny, I say that, but I feel like to 99% of people, I would seem completely obsessive about it, right? Like, like when we moved into our house, we got one of the whole house water filters installed, like the huge one that's outside. So that like all the shower water and everything is filtered too. And, pretty much always try to get like organic and getting stuff from like local ranches for meat and whatnot. I do think the water is like a big one. It's like getting bigger. And I've noticed actually like since we got that whole house filter installed and I basically was like only drinking our house water for 6-12 months, I like can't really drink Austin water anymore. Like it's super noticeable. Like my body immediately reacts when it's like, you shouldn't drink this. But that's not an awareness that I ever had before, like totally getting off of it. I mean, I do think that like we were talking about this a little bit before, that there was this one size fits all phase of health and fitness where it's like everybody should be nobody eat carbs anymore, right? Or like, okay, nobody eat meat, right? Okay, we're now everybody's doing keto, right? And I feel like we've graduated a little bit beyond that, where now it's this like, okay, there is some intervention that will make you feel significantly better, right? And there are probably some that will make almost everybody feel better, right? Like getting off food covered in glyphosate, I think that's going to be one of the next really big ones, right? And that people are starting to notice that now. But like, I figured out this gluten sensitivity thing in the most random way, where I had tried going gluten-free like 7 or 8 years ago and didn't really, I noticed a little bit of a benefit. I was like, oh, okay, this is like nice. Like I feel a little bit better, but it wasn't that stark. And I think that like I must have just had a mild sensitivity that I just hammered the shit out of for 30 years, and it like eventually caught up with me, but I didn't notice. And then I got the flu and was just like puking my guts out. And then I also I was using supplemental like NAD, right? So I had that combination. And after the flu went away and I had this NAD patch on, and I mean, I just felt like a different person. I was like, what the fuck is going on? And I was trying to explain it to my wife, Cosette, and I was literally crying because I was like, I can't go back to like whatever was going on before. Like something's wrong, right? And I spent the next 6, 7, 8 weeks like trying to figure out what it was. Got like, all the heavy metals testing, got blood work done, like kind of just a bunch of things. And eventually my coach was like, looking at your blood work, it could be some sort of like systemic inflammatory, like food sensitivity thing. Let's just go down the list, right? And like the easiest one to start with would be gluten, and like try cutting that out. And it was like night and day after a week or two. And I think that I never noticed it when I would take, when I wouldn't have it for a day or two, because it wasn't enough to fully get it out of my system. But after a couple weeks of like basically zero, and I was like, oh, okay, this was why I felt so much better, right? But I'd sort of been in that state for years, right? And didn't notice. And at the same time, I'm not like, oh, nobody should eat gluten. I think a lot of people probably can tolerate it okay, right? But like experiment, right? Like for some people, it's dairy. Like I can have all the dairy I want, right? I've got like strong Scandinavian energy, right? Like I'm good. But for a lot of people, yeah, it's gonna like mess with your system. And I feel like that's kind of the phase we're getting into now of like look at all of the stuff that's out there and sample, figure out which ones actually work for you and make the biggest difference for you. And some of them are going to be like for everybody, right? Like don't eat sick animals, right? Like healthy meat is like one of the best foods in the world, but unhealthy meat is probably one of the worst foods in the world, right? It's like if you're eating McDonald's burgers, you're going to have a bad time. And so it's like those ones are pretty global, but then it's like, okay, pick and choose of the other ones, like experiment and see how you feel.
Makes me wonder, should everyone just get a food sensitivity test just so you know?
Man, there's so many of these things that I feel like would be so useful if they weren't like so expensive. Like if somebody figures out a way to do these things cheaper so that more people can do them, that's going to be just a huge unlock, right? Because like I try to do blood testing every 4 to 6 months, and I do it through my gym and whatnot, but it's still like $500 a pop.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's a big expense for most people.
Yeah.
And the heavy metals tests are annoying. You've usually got to do your hair. I did the hand scan, which is super cool. Right? It's like if that kind of tech catches on, then that's going to be wild, because you can just really quickly see like, oh yeah, you're high in lead or mercury or whatever. You can go work on that. But I think a lot of people don't even know that there are heavy metals tests. They don't even think to do it, let alone do it every 6 months or something.
Well, and they don't even know how negatively that can be affecting them. Like there's so many negative externalities from having heavy metals just
totally
overloading in your body.
Yeah. And you could be getting it from just weird places too, right? Like certain foods, could be the water, right? It's just, I mean, and we were talking about this a bit before too. It's like, there's this interesting immune system response, I feel like, in the American like population right now, where everybody knows something's wrong.
Yes.
And we're trying to figure out what it is, right? And there's definitely big contenders, right? Like I think the glyphosate one is just going to get like bigger and bigger. The food quality and like industrial scale food production is going to be like another one. But these are like hard problems to solve too, right? And you do have to be like kind of a weirdo to avoid all of it.
Definitely.
You have to be comfortable being weird.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's like, you have to be willing to like go into the restaurant and be like, you know, can you just like grill it or cook it with butter, right? Like, which is uncomfortable, right? And it's easier in a place like Austin, but most of the country, right? It's going to give you such a weird look.
I think we're waking up though. Like I remember when I went carnivore in 2019, my normie friends in New York were like, dude, you're going to kill yourself. Yeah. And now a lot of them are asking, hey, you know, where should I buy meat from? You know, tell me how to follow a carnivore diet. So like even that, just like little piece of data, I'm like, we're waking up for sure.
The carnivore diet is good too, because it's just naturally an elimination diet. So it does help, like, you know, if you have the gluten sensitivity, it's like at least you don't have to necessarily pay for the panel to see if you have the sensitivity. You can just pay for the food and then slowly reintroduce things and see what, you know, negatively affects you.
Dude, crazy like anecdote plug for just the benefits of those aggressive elimination diets. When keto like first started getting big, my wife and I decided we would just like try it for fun, like see what happened. And we weren't even like thinking this might happen, but she had like severe eczema for her basically whole life since like she was 12 or 13. Like just, you know, open wounds on like her hands and elbows and stuff, and just went away after a month. And it basically didn't come back. Like it came back 10 or 20% at different times, but it like just about cured it after a month, went off keto, and it didn't come back. Like absolutely wild, right? But that's the kind of stuff where like I feel ridiculous saying it sometimes because it sounds like one of those like, oh my God, this is a magic cure. But like even just eliminating stuff sometimes really cues you into like what might be going wrong in your system.
Yeah. We talk about this all the time. It's like, you know, your wife's dealt with the skin issue. She's going to doctor after doctor. No one's telling her that it's maybe like diet and lifestyle. That could be something that's
like,
causing
no, put the steroid on it.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're going to have a steroid prescription for the rest of your life. I mean, dude, I had the worst acne in high school. Or I just like, I mean, not the worst. I had bad acne in like high school. And the dermatologist put me on doxycycline.
Yeah.
It's so
a broad spectrum antibiotic, right?
Yeah.
So I was just nuking the shit out of my system.
You were on Accutane.
Yeah,
right?
I was on Accutane. It was terrible.
Oh my God.
I wish I could go back and just not do that. But
so
you know,
crazy. Yeah, a drug where they say you have to be on birth control while you're taking it, like maybe is not doing nice things to your body.
Yeah.
So crazy.
And now you're smearing beef towel on your face, probably, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
I've got the White Oak Pastures lavender scented face moisturizer.
That's so good.
It's good stuff. It's really nice. Yeah.
You can actually tell when someone uses beef towel. Like they have the glow.
They have the glow.
The beefy glow.
Well, it's also the and I'm off the sunscreen train.
For real?
Yeah. And basically like no skincare products. Like I'll use that one occasionally if I feel dry.
Yeah.
But then like really just like nothing else. And I like haven't used shampoo in 7-8 years now too. Just like getting all of that out of my system, I feel like I didn't notice those changes as much, but they definitely feel like they've been good interventions.
I think the sunblock one is definitely not just a tinfoil hat thing.
That one's going to be interesting. Well, that one's interesting because there's like some nuance to it, right? Where it's like, yeah, getting burned is awful for you.
Yeah.
Right? Like you don't want to get sunburned and you definitely don't want to overdo it, right? Like the excessive UV radiation like does cause the DNA strand breaks and whatever. Like it can cause cancer, but not getting any UV exposure also seems really bad.
Yeah.
And somebody else pointed this out, like you look at people who live in, Middle East or India, like really hot climates, right? Like they're covered most of the time, right? Like they're not naked in the sun, getting as much sun as humanly possible. Like you don't necessarily want to do that 24/7, but you definitely, I think, want some on your skin to like, because like it seems so important for so many bodily processes. Like, do you guys know the thing about like eyesight development in kids?
No.
Yeah, if kids don't get UV radiation on their eyes, like that's what causes myopia more than looking at things close to them. They did this like crazy study in China where, because it's like, there was something where like 97% of the population in certain regions were all becoming nearsighted. And so they're like, okay, we're basically going to do a natural experiment, try to figure out how do we prevent our kids from needing glasses. And they thought it was, they thought it was like reading and writing all the time, like looking at stuff up close. And that had some effect. But the bigger one was how many hours of sunlight they got as a kid. And it's apparently it's like 3 to 4 hours minimum that they have to be like outside for their eyes to not like get kind of messed up. Which you wouldn't think would be super important, but it's like, okay, now we know about that one. Like what other interesting things, and we know about the vitamin D production, obviously.
Yeah.
Like what other interesting stuff is the sun doing for us that we're just like, no, like Like, we're going to hide from this.
My favorite is the guys on Twitter that think that if they magically quit seed oils, they don't get sunburnt anymore.
Yeah.
I love that one.
I love that.
Like these.
I buy it.
Yeah. There's a lot of factors to it.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting one where I feel like it's like a combination of things.
Yeah.
Right. Where it's like, I feel like there is something where if you are more inflamed overall, you're going to be more sensitive to other like sources of inflammation and damage, right? Like, I don't know how well that's been explored, but it does seem like if you were super, if your system was very healthy, you'd be able to handle other small stressors better, right? And like, I've looked at it a little bit, and the whole like how your body produces cortisol in response to the like amount of UV radiation hitting your body and your eyes, and like that, affects how well you can handle like being in the sun. There might be something with sunglasses too. Yeah. It's kind of interesting because I guess your eyes have the most sense, or some of the like, you guys have actual experts on this show, so I should probably stop talking. But right, like there's just all this interesting stuff.
It's fascinating.
Right? Yeah. Like I think that's the biggest thing is there's so many things we don't know. It's kind of like Chesterson's fence, right? Like we just have no idea how all this stuff works, but then we assume we do, and it takes a long time to realize what we might be wrong about. Right? It's like what trans fat was created in like 1910s or something.
Yeah. And
it took 70 years for us to realize how bad it was. Like cigarettes, I mean, the first studies started saying how bad they were in the 40s, but it took until the 60s or 70s for doctors to say like, stop using these things. Like if you wait for some of that stuff, you're going to be dead.
Yeah. It's definitely something I think about a lot. Like this change that people are expecting to happen, like if you're waiting for a policy change, you're going to be pretty late to the chase when it comes to all these different things that are happening. Like you might want to start incorporating some of the things that you see online that might sound a little bit quirky.
It's wild how much of that stuff has ended up eventually getting backed up by science, right? And a lot of it hasn't too, right? Like not all of it, not all of the like fringe stuff on Twitter obviously like turns out to be true, but some of it does.
Yeah.
Right? And it's almost like a skill you have to develop, right? Of your like, science intuition with like health things in particular, right? We're being able to look at something and be like, oh, okay, that kind of like intuitively makes sense based on my understanding of the things in the past that have turned out to be bad for us.
Yes.
Right? Like the fake food thing is a perfect one because we've never made a fake food that didn't eventually turn out to be really bad for us.
Yes.
Right? Like it hasn't happened. There are basically the ones that we now know are killing us, and they're the ones that we don't know yet. And it's like, okay, well, if you had to make a guess, does it seem like maybe we shouldn't eat car lubricant? Right? Like it might not be guaranteed, it might not be as terrible for you as some people think, but it's probably not actually that good for you. And it's like a pretty low cost intervention to make.
Totally.
Yeah.
Just like if you can just start by developing just some intuitive sense of what makes you feel really good or really bad, that's such an amazing starting point.
It's huge.
Right?
Yeah.
You have to break the paradigm like at least once. Like you need to try
Just the first
keto
break.
and just see some change, because then the light bulb goes off. You're like, okay, I can actually create change in my health.
Yeah. You get that sense of agency.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh, I'm not stuck feeling like shit. I can do something about it.
Totally.
Right. And then you get motivated to go figure out all the crazy stuff. And then eventually, you've got the water filter and the ball sucking device. And you're just like,
you
good
start
to
a
go.
podcast
Kegel
called
apps.
The Meat Mafia.
Yeah, Kegel apps.
It all comes full circle.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, listen, Nat, we could literally talk to you all day. We know you're on dad duty tonight. We don't want to hold you up for that. But dude, I feel like, we learned so much from this conversation. You're such an interesting guy. I'm glad that we can now call you a friend too. Yeah. And we'll see you at Barton Springs very soon, or in Taro. I heard you love Intero as well.
Don't tell people.
Can we bleep that out?
Cut that.
Dude, this is the problem of like, there have been all these great spots in Austin that I just love. And I'm not saying I make them popular, but somebody talks about them on a popular podcast, and then everybody goes, and you can't get a table anymore, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard because I love the guys who run it, and they're amazing, and I want them to succeed, and I still want to be able to go.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, have you guys been to Desnudo yet?
No.
We've heard about it, but have not been.
I mean, it's the best coffee in Austin, like no question.
Oh, this is the spot that
Trent was talking about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you go on the weekends now, it's an hour wait.
That's insane.
Like, I mean, what other coffee shop has an hour-long line on the weekend?
Couldn't tell you.
But it just basically has gone like Austin viral. And I mean, we just happened to know about it earlier because we live pretty close to it. And it was like, oh, cool. We can just like come hang on Saturday or get a coffee. We like can't go anymore.
Yeah.
So
we maybe bleep that out.
Yeah.
No, you can leave it in.
All right.
Everyone, yeah.
Cool. Little nugget. But appreciate you, man. Thanks for doing this, Nat.
Thanks for having me on,
Nat.
guys.
Cool.